I'm here with Professor Ricardo Hausmann, a world-renowned development economist, a founding director of the Harvard Growth Lab, the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor, you spent 3 days in Cambodia meeting many stakeholders. What is your reflection and impression of the state of the Cambodian economy?
Well, first of all, it's an incredibly dynamic place. I mean, most of the countries that I go to don't grow at 6-7%. So it's an impressive rate of change of everything, right? It's an economy that was incredibly poor 20 years ago. It's now, approaching middle income status. It's really, you see it in the transformation of the businesses and the transformation of the investor profiles and in the export components of the country. You see how the possibilities of the world filter in here in terms of people who are now, say, exploiting this trend to de-risking from China or from elsewhere, and they're trying to observe what can they do in Cambodia. We see it in the fact that companies are now complaining about finding workers, even low-skilled workers, not only high-skilled workers. So you see it in the age and the quality of the transport equipment that you see, new cars, many new motorcycles and so on. So it looks like a really dynamic and place that's on the road to prosperity.
Very promising. And theme of the high-level workshop, Cambodia Economic Diversification Pathway, experience from international experience. Why is economic diversification is so vital for Cambodia?
Now, that's a great question. Countries often get the recommendation that they have to focus in their areas of comparative advantage, and I think that the challenge of economic development is really to transform your areas of comparative advantage. Countries don't become rich by making more of the same. As they become richer, they need to change what they do. They typically start with activities that only survive because of their low wage level, typically in garments. But as they progress and become richer, they need to be able to move to activities that can afford to pay higher wages. And that implies moving into electronics, into machinery, into cars, into pharmaceuticals, into other things that can afford those higher wages. Obviously, those higher wages have to be accompanied by higher skill, higher education. So it's a process that also requires this educational effort to be continuing and to be paying off. So that's the reason why I think diversification is key to the growth process.
Well, Cambodia have made significant progress in its economic diversification journeys, according to the Harvard Growth Lab database. So moving forwards, which country that Cambodia should look in order to learn from what works, what doesn't work in the journey of her economic diversification?
I think Cambodia is fortunate to be in the most dynamic region of the world. East Asia, Southeast Asia are the places that grow the fastest in this world. And so that's the environment in which Cambodia is embedded. So it has very good examples of countries that started first. Obviously, Korea started in the 60s, and Thailand started in the 60s, 70s, and Indonesia also. But then, it moved to Vietnam, and Cambodia is a little bit behind them in terms of the level of development, the level of income. So it has very clear lessons from the other countries in the region. And they have all moved in this pathway of greater complexity, changing the structure of their exports, moving into higher value industries in a process in which they are educating and urbanizing. So all of these things come together, and it's very easy for countries to get stuck in one or the other. So whether the educational system cannot accompany the speed at which the economy wants higher skilled workers, or that their cities grow in a way that make them somewhat dysfunctional with impossible traffic jams, with it very difficult for workers to go from where they live to where they work. So these are some of the challenges of this growth process. But, I worked a lot on Sub-Saharan Africa, on North Africa, on Latin America, which is my region. And typically, I don't work in countries that grow at this rate and where the possibilities of growth are so patently obvious.
Right. So another important aspect is inclusion and sustainability. So how can we kind of, marriage accelerating economic diversification at the same time to ensure that the growth is inclusive and sustainable?
I think on the inclusive side, the good thing about Cambodia's pattern of growth is that it is very intensive in labor. So the growth of manufacturing, the growth of export-oriented manufacturing is very much about hiring workers. And that means it's not about developing some natural resource that hires no workers. This is very labor intensive, and that creates an avenue for people to move out of agriculture into activities that pay more. And as that happens, there are fewer people left in agriculture, so they can work with more land. So this process helps not only urban areas to be able to pay higher wages, but also it helps to allow for productivity increases in rural areas as land becomes more plentiful for those that remain in rural areas. So that's the secret of inclusivity. It's the fact that for most people, the asset that they have is labor, and this is a strategy about making labor more valuable, more productive, and more opportunities for labor. As of sustainability, I think this is a theme that might become an area of comparative advantage for Cambodia, because Cambodia has one of the greenest electrical grids, because it has a lot of hydro, it has a lot of solar potential, it has a lot of hydro potential to be developed yet. And I think that the world we're going into is a world in which green energy is going to be very hard to move around, because green energy is mainly electricity, and it's very hard to move electricity long distances. In the past, energy came mostly out of oil, and oil was very easy to move around. So if you wanted to develop an energy-intensive industry, you could put it anywhere and just bring the energy. In the future, energy-intensive industries will have to co-locate with green sources of energy. And I think this is a theme for Cambodia. To what extent Cambodia can develop its green sources of energy as a way of attracting industries that want to decarbonize. So the goal is not to decarbonize Cambodia for itself, because Cambodia's emissions are pitiful, are small. They won't change the climate. But to what extent can Cambodia help the world decarbonize by developing its green energy resources? And that would be a win-win for both growth and sustainability for the world. So I'm optimistic that there are possibilities there. It will take a lot of work, because right now, energy in Cambodia is not cheap. Yeah. And so we need to develop those resources in a way that makes them very cheap and very competitive, and in a way that makes Cambodia richer, not in a way that will force Cambodia into unsustainable subsidies on energy, but just it is a way to make the country richer.
All right. So doing all this with this vision, key important player is the private sector. Cambodia have the government private sector forum as a venue for the private sectors to voice their concerns, their problem, so that the government can address them. So how do you see this forum can play a role in economic diversification being sustainable, inclusive process?
First of all, I'm really amazed at the quality of the public-private conversation. I've met with some of the chambers of commerce, and they have been extremely orderly and transparent in terms of what are the issues that they find, what are the solutions that they propose, what are the instances in which they have proposed them, and so on. So I think that the quality of the public-private conversation is really impressive. I was not expecting to find such a level of interaction. I think the challenge is that once you have identified a problem, then you have to find the solution and implement the solution. And that requires something that is the hardest thing to do, which is not public-private coordination, but public-public coordination. Because governments tend to be organized in silos, and most solutions involve crossing silos. And many of the governments I have worked with stumble in that element, in public-public coordination. After the public-private coordination is very good at identifying problems and priorities maybe. We need to do more in identifying solutions and implementing those solutions.
Right, so I think that's come to final question. The Australian government supported CAPRED, the flagship program, to support the Cambodian government process. What role could you advise that the DP development partners like CAPRED can actively participate and contribute into this whole process of supporting the Cambodian vision for future development?
Well, I must say that I'm super impressed by the approach that the Australian government has taken to development. I have had the opportunity to work with other bilateral partners in the world, and I don't think that I have ever seen an organization that's, first of all, so focused on policy and on helping the government formulate policy, define policy priority solutions, and so on. Secondly, I have yet to find another government agency that instead of pushing their priorities and their agenda is really focused on enabling the government to achieve its own goals. And I have found here a group of people that are amazingly knowledgeable about the country, amazingly well respected by the government officials that they interact with, and amazingly resourceful in terms of mobilizing resources to solve and address problems. So I leave Cambodia with the idea that this CAPRED model that the Australian government has developed here is something that we should imitate in the rest of the world.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for your insights. Please have a good trip back to the state, to Harvard, and hope to see you again.
Hope to be back.
All right, thank you.